I'm doing a book review on DuBois, Fanon, Cabral, The Margins of Elite Anti-Colonial Leadership. And this book is authored by Ofori, B-E-K-O-E. I'm going to try Biko with that. This book is unique. Again, the title, DuBois, Fanon, F-A-N-O-N, Cabral, C-A-B-R-A-L. Those are three different people. The Margins of Elite Anti-Colonialism Leadership. Now, this is why this book is very unique. Excuse me. In this book, this is one of the first books I've seen that are exceptionally critical of W.E.B. Du Bois. It is basically claiming that he grew up in Massachusetts in an area of the country where most of the ire, the political ire or racial ire, was focused more toward on the Irish as opposed to the black. Now, I think that's a real perspective thing. Now, I'm not at all trying to diminish the experience of the Irish, but the history of the black person is pretty well documented in this country as to where no other race of people were devalued on a humanitarian level. No other race. There was no other race of people that had to reach the level of humanity before they argued civil liberties. None. So I think that Dr. Becko, is making some assumptions or generalizations before that. Actually, I'm sorry. Charles Peterson is the author of the book. Becko actually did a writing on this book in African Studies Quarterly. The author is Charles F. Peterson. Look it up. DuBois, Fanon, Cabral, The Margins of Elite Anti-Colonialism Leadership. That's a Lexington Books publication. In this book, Peterson is making the assumption of a few things. And his first premise is that the political ire that in the area in which Du Bois grew up in was one more so toward the Irish, and I don't doubt that, but I find it challenging that at the late 1800s that there was a place where black people were welcome in the United States. That's just not true. It was not as bad as it was in slavery in the South, but that's not hard to be. And so he says first, he was in this particular area where it wasn't a lot of black people and the political ire wasn't against black people. Then he went down to Fisk for a short amount of time. And then when he did which is when he was around educated black folk, still not around poor meat and potatoes black folk. Then he went to Berlin, Germany to begin his graduate work, meaning Du Bois. And then he came back and was the first black person to graduate from Harvard. So he's pointing out a pattern of wherever Du Bois is going, he's not around the people he claims he represents. Then he further points out of all of the black colleges, Du Bois never taught at one. So again, he's not immersed in the black culture that in which he says he's fighting. Beyond that, he begins aligning himself more with the colonialist as opposed to the oppressed by the elitism attitude of that is indicative in the talented tenth doctrine, where this group is superior to another group, and in that he's saying Peter is focusing on the fact that if a tenth of a person's race is more intelligent than the other race, he's trying to impose that elitism on the blacks, where Peterson is saying that the elitism is not across the population, that Du Bois is claiming that he is elite to a certain group of black people, which are the people that are basically the oppressed. And that is a degree of hypocrisy in there, or at least removal from his point, where he's more like his oppressor than he is like the oppressed. And kind of uses this to reduce the mission and effectiveness of Du Bois. And he compares Cabral and Fanon, who, at least in the U.S., are a lot less well known, because these people were educated men, but they aligned themselves with the impoverished of their countries and had the support of the impoverished in their countries. In fact, he brings up the poor relationship between Du Bois and Marcus Garvey, saying that Garvey was more in support of the poor man, which is why Du Bois did not care for Marcus Garvey and felt Marcus Garvey was a threat. I did not see as great a focus on, which I also saw in opening, as to where he could have discussed the issue between Booker T. Washington, as to where Booker T. Washington dedicated himself to an HBCU, as to where Du Bois didn't. Now, this is the biggest flaw I see in this argument. I'm less concerned with the comparison because I'm doing a research work on W.E.B. Du Bois. I'm less concerned about the Fanon and Cabral comparison with W.E.B. Du Bois. They worked in their own countries. He was an international figure. I'm not really worried about that part. What I am worried about is the fact that he was saying because Du Bois was an elitist, that he was more aligned with the colonialists as opposed to the body of the black experience. And what I'm saying is, or my point, I feel the big thing that deflates Peterson's argument is that would be assuming that the elite blacks were not subject to the oppression and racism and lack of rights as everyone else. There was no 1964 Civil Rights Bill. There was no 1965 Voting Rights Bill during the day of W.E.B. Du Bois, which his work highly influenced. So it doesn't matter if he was an elite or if he wasn't. He was part of that black group as a whole that was denied opportunity and access. So that's where I feel that this work was weak, but I felt it was strong because you do have to have criticism to evaluate a person or an entity or a cause. So I felt it was valuable in that way. I need to do more research on Peterson himself. But I felt that to be interesting. And it's a book to check out if you want to see a balance between DuBois and the history that's generally praising him now. So again, that is DuBois, Fanon, Cabral, The Margins of Elite and Elite Anti-Colonial Leadership. And the author is Charles F. Peterson.